Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another session of Manifesting the Sacred Masculine. I'm Mercedes Kirkel, your guide and facilitator for this course, and our focus for today is the archetype of the king. So I'm going to go into our slides here. Give me just a moment. All right. I think I'm getting better at this. So here's our course, and here is the king. And the best picture I could find, this is a representation of King Arthur, who definitely is one of the main images of king energy in the archetypal form. So this is our image for today of what we're covering. But before we get into it, I want to start with reviewing what's happened since last week. So last week we focused on the lover archetype, which is, from my point of view, maybe the most important part of this whole course, although next week we'll be integrating the lover, especially in terms of how the masculine interplays with the feminine. So we'll be bringing that back and really looking at that next week again. But we introduced it last week with looking at the lover, and here were some of the practices that were suggested to make an inventory of your own strengths and weaknesses in the lover archetype, to take a look at Jesus's teaching around love God and love your neighbor, and explore what that really means for you and how you feel you're living it or not, any changes you might want to make. There was a suggested practice of being present to someone else. We talked about presence being one of the key qualities of the lover archetype in the masculine form. And so if someone engaged that practice, I'd love to hear how that went. And also another one of the suggested practices was engaging in sensual experience. And then there were lots and lots of videos, articles, and movies on the lover. If anybody watched any of those and, really had a response, I welcome hearing about that, or anything you observed since last week about the lover archetype in yourself or others or in the world. So with that said, I'm going to go back to sharing our main screen and invite whoever's so moved to share. And today, we're going to slow down a little bit. We're going to take a little bit more time for integrating. And integration is one of the main qualities of the king archetype. So we're going to practice that today in integrating where we're at and what we've gleaned thus far from delving into the sacred masculine. So today, a little more spaciousness for check-ins, and would love to hear whatever anyone wants to share about the lover archetype, or if there's anything else, that relates to the course, feel free. So anyone who'd like to go.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I would like to share my experiences on being present. And I found, conceptually, it was an easy idea, but I found, maybe the warrior coming up first in me before the lover in order to hold space. And I was able to catch myself on several occasions, but that was the intent of my practice this past week. And I think that one of the things, when I was able to go into it, it was very de-escalating. It was much more of a, just being part of the emotional expression that was coming forth, as opposed to, having another opinion and being able to, try to be in the fix-it position. One of the videos that I thought was really entertaining and useful was that it's not about the nail. So I like that part.
I've heard from many men that they really relate to that video. Yes.
Yeah. I would say it's mostly the immediate de-escalation factor.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I feel like this is so important. I'd like to add on a few things that were stimulated in me from hearing your share. One of the most common things that happens when people are in a relationship and not engaging the lover archetype, where they're relating to the feminine and not engaging the lover archetype, is that they either go into the warrior or into the magician. Warrior looks like fighting, telling the person they're wrong, or defending yourself. I'm not wrong, I'm right. So warrior goes into right wrong most usually. Magician goes into, well, let's explain this, let's talk about where this comes from and, what it's related to. How is this about your past, and
The problem solver.
The problem solver, exactly.
Yeah.
And then fix it is kind of a combination of the both, because fix it is action, but also, being guided by problem solving generally. So it involves both. So those are all things that most of us have been highly trained to do instead of responding from the lover. And it's not that they're wrong. It's that there's a time and place for everything. But if those are eclipsing the lover so that you don't have access to the lover, it's a limit. It's a limitation. And what I would say is we want to be able to have access to everything, and we can be in choice about what would most serve in this moment and in this moment and in this moment. And what you mentioned about being de-escalating, I think this is a common surprise for the masculine, is that the masculine thinks when they step into that lover archetype of just being present, not defending themselves, not going into fixing, but just being present, that one of the fears that can come up is, this is just going to make it worse because I'm giving space to it. It's like I'm giving energy to it. I'm feeding it. And in fact, the opposite is what tends to happen, because you're doing what the feminine so needs, which is to be heard and to be supported by giving that space, that safe space to be supported. And so to me, that's a huge awareness to support you to support the masculine in feeling comfortable, even feeling safe to come from that place of holding space and being present.
Thank you. I'd also like to add in that while this week I've been thinking about what it means to be more in the lover than the other archetypes, and also listening to some of the videos. And the first article that you had, I thought was very illuminating. It was the one that included the video clip about Zorba the Greek, but it was about the empathy, capacity. And I think that empathy is really, it's a mechanism, to help, shift to that appropriate level.
Right. And that to me is what empathy, the heart of empathy is holding space and being present. It's, I know in one of them, they equate empathy with sympathy, but I don't actually equate them in the way that I relate to it. To me, sympathy is taking on the characteristics, joining the person in the characteristics. I don't think that's actually, I think that's more the feminine response. I think the masculine response of empathy is to hold space. It's not saying this is true of me. It's not even saying I agree with you. It's saying I'll be here for your reality, for what's true of you.
Yeah, I like that aspect. The other part is thinking about the masculine and the feminine within myself, as opposed to myself and my partner, is the balance between that. So I've been thinking a lot about, if I can hold space, for somebody else, then within me, can my sacred masculine, hold space for my divine feminine inside. So,
and I actually believe that's the path, especially at this time, maybe not ultimately, but at this time, because so many men and women, but we're talking in this case men, have lost touch with their inner feminine, that their most direct pathway to reclaiming that is first through relationship with a woman. And through seeing how that works, it will lead them to reclaiming the inner feminine with themselves.
That makes sense. It was earlier this week that I was doing something in the kitchen and that I really messed something up. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was probably like Monday. And I just, my initial response was, I got really mad and then at myself. And then I kind of just, brushed off and kind of, I guess repressed it or bypassed it or something like that. But then I thought, maybe my sacred masculine can just hold space for that part of me. So I just let myself go, darn it. And even though I was the only one in the room, that was very therapeutic, for that aspect to hold for that aspect.
Yes, because that energy is real there. I'm so frustrated. I want competence relative to this, whatever it is.
Right.
And that's totally real. And energy, this is the law of energy. It doesn't disappear magically. It always goes somewhere. And if we don't express it and release it so that it can come back to balance and peace, it's going to go somewhere, and most often somewhere that's not supporting us.
Well, after I did that, I just felt, so much more at ease because I had, let that out and I had held that space, and it was.
Yes. And this is the great liberation for so many men who've been trained that their feminine feelings aren't okay and they can't give voice to them and they can't even connect and feel them, and that has harmed the masculine tremendously. Really, really limited.
Yeah.
So I want to say one other thing. I feel like I'm going to put out something that I believe that maybe other people don't believe. So I'm feeling a little tentative and cautious about saying this, but I think it's important. What I want to say is that the feminine inherently, well, I don't know if it's inherent, but I think there's a way that much of the time the feminine feels easily overpowered by the masculine. That the masculine has a strength that I think, in my experience, many men don't realize that they have, that the feminine feels. Whether it's physical power, they're just physically stronger than us, men versus women in general. But it's not just physical, it's energetic. Like, there's an authority that the masculine holds that's powerful, even just when they speak, or even just their emotional kind of default that they come from holds a certain level of power that I, in my own personal experience, can be easily overpowering for the feminine. And lots of times what the masculine experiences as feminine trying to dominate is really, I think, a reaction to that sense of being overpowered. And so when the masculine holds space for the feminine, it provides a safety for the feminine that I'm not going to be overpowered, that there really is space for me here, and the feminine can relax. And instead of being in the fighter warrior mode, like I have to really fight to just come up to even here, the feminine can relax. And I think that's where the de-escalation happens. And I like that space a lot. So personally,
Could I say something?
Yes.
I've observed that, and for me, it's more that the men more easily connect to self-esteem, and they are more connected to their energy in a more unconscious level, if you want to call it that way. So we interpret that they have more power, and for me, it's that they feel more comfortable with the power than they have, and that is that's what's attractive. But at work, what I observed is that men love fighting in the words of arguing and discussing and things like that. And the woman wants a space to be herself without having to argue about it. Yeah. So
part of the warrior energy.
Yeah. So they feel more comfortable in the warrior. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. So it's, I don't feel overpowered. I just don't feel like I need to push for my space. I just wanted that space to come.
Well, what I would say is that you want, and the balance to this is that the feminine has a different kind of power, but in a certain realm, and it's often in a lot of our world, because a lot of our world is so masculinized, certainly the work world, where if it's an arena that's favoring masculine kind of activities, I think it's many women or those in the feminine can easily feel overpowered.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'd love to hear other people's experiences with your exploration of the lover archetype.
Well, I can continue. For me, I'm not sure that I follow your instructions, but what I found is that the lover in me is a voice that gives me permission to be who I am. And this is a voice that I have been looking outside all my life. It's a space that you are mentioning. And now I can give myself permission and I can give myself the space. And when I looked outside, it was in the form of approval. Yeah, that space. And now I can give myself the approval. So I found that energy of the lover kind of a mediator. So a little bit like Chris said, that the mediator, the lover says, hey, you need warrior energy to develop this thing, or you need the magician energy, so you need to change your thoughts to make this happen. Yeah, so that's what I found the voice of the lover in me to be. And I also found that one of the pacts that I have done to myself when I was a child is that I was going to be successful at all costs. And that cost was in a certain way to fit in with the world around me. So what I found this week is that I need to define success in a different way. Yeah. So this is more the 4D way as opposed to the 3D way. So that was part of the new power of the lover in me. And then, yeah, so that was mostly what I found about the lover. So basically what I tried to do this week was to develop the lover energy in me in whatever way would help me most.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Very clear and very...
Yeah, so it's really nice to find him.
Yay! And what so many of the relationship coaches are saying is that for those who are longing to be in a relationship and feeling frustrated if they're not in a relationship, women in particular, that this is the missing step, is that they have to give themselves what they're looking for outside. And so they have to become the lover to themselves, and then the law of attraction, that gets attracted in. Not to say that that's why you're doing it, but I'm aware that this is a big movement in the relationship world these days, is developing exactly what you're talking about for that reason and many other reasons, just our wholeness altogether, our happiness.
Yeah, yeah. And also, it is unfair to put the weight of what we need on someone else. Yeah, being the
Yes.
yeah.
And I think men can really relate to this.
So yeah, it's good to oh yeah, it is good. It's freedom, basically. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. That's a big celebration for me, what you just brought forth. Thank you.
Hi, this is Rajender. I have several things. This idea that you put forth that the feminine at times feels overpowered by the masculine, I would agree with you, but I think I want to sit with that because I think there's some kind of belief behind it. When you say it, it resonates with me, but I think there must be some kind of belief behind it that's not quite right for me anyway. I resonate with it, but there's something behind it, I think, internally. When I was doing this, listening to your, because I wasn't at the meeting last week, listening to the lecture or the thing, the class, you said that, I think maybe it was anecdotal, maybe it were studies, I'm not sure, that people who were transgender and who started to take testosterone, females to become male, were unable to connect as easily or at all with other feelings besides anger. And I'm wondering, in myself, when I go through that, the warrior gives me the energy to go through into the mind to do the meditations that help me be neutral and receptive to listen. But when I'm triggered, I go into the feminine path. I cannot go into the lover path at that point. So I'm trying to figure out males who have an abundance of testosterone, how they do that. Are they training their minds through the magician to do this? You know, I'm kind of like in this, how they do this.
I think it's through the lover energy. I think that's what we're exactly opening up to. So let me backtrack a little bit and see if I can clarify this a little bit more. When you say when you're triggered, you go into the feminine?
Yeah, when I'm triggered. So I either go backwards into the warrior.
Yes. And then we get into fights.
Right, or I'll go into the more feminine path and feel, you know, if it's sad or whatever it is.
Right. And the part of you that is holding space for that feminine part, that's being aware of that feminine part, is your inner lover.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right.
And relative to your question about how do males with testosterone connect, I think it's like similar to what I was talking about in response to Chris's comment, that I think the pathway is and it's a training pathway, it's an education pathway at this time. I think in the future, when as a culture we're getting good at this, people will get the training organically as they're growing up from seeing the other adults modeling this. But right now it's not being modeled very much in our world. So for most of us, it's taking education, specific education when we're adults. But I think first it's through learning how to be the inner lover and hold space for the feminine, finding the safety in doing that, seeing how the feminine calms down, opens, suddenly begins feeding the masculine again with the feminine's loving energy when that happens. And that will give space for the masculines to start to give that to themselves, just like Chris was expressing his experience this week. I think that's the exact pathway. And that's what Mary Magdalene has said, that this teaching that's so prevalent right now in the New Age spiritual world, that this is the time of the feminine coming to the front. This is what she's talking about, is the real teaching. It's the feminine of modeling their own opening to their emotions and being led to God by that, and being very clear that they're not crossing the line into blame and attack of the masculine in that place, that's going to be the guidance that's going to allow the masculine to follow in doing the same, both relative to the external feminine and relative to their inner feminine. That's
Okay, so
what I said?
yeah.
Okay.
So basically you're saying the masculine lover is the holding space for the feminine. That's just it.
That's not all of it, but it's the beginning. It's a big, big beginning to do that.
Okay.
And you know, one of the things that I didn't do last week that I have done since then, so I'm going to include that this week, is the code of the new lover.
Okay.
And I think that will clarify more what the new lover is really about. So I have that for this week to look at.
Okay, thanks.
So I just had a couple observations, more from what we've just been talking about. So you were saying about how, Mercedes, about the the feminine feeling overpowered by the masculine. And I think for me personally, I've taken this time, probably the last couple of years, to really withdraw, to be able to listen to myself. And it has been not just because I've felt overpowered by the masculine. I think there's a component of that, but I think it's that component of fix it, where I've allowed that to really be my focus. And I know people that have been with me on the journey here have heard this before, but anyways, and so I've allowed that to really overpower just knowing anything about me in a way. And so it's been, so it's just interesting looking at it in that context, looking at kind of what I've done in the last couple of years in that context. So,
Thank you. And I think for a lot of women, that our training is so much to be in the masculine, just because of our world being so masculinized, and that's what we needed for survival.
Right.
I think for many of us, it's a really big process to start to disentangle that and start to realize what the feminine is, even connect with our inner feminine and see even inwardly how our feminine has been overpowered, our inner feminine has been overpowered by our inner masculine.
Yeah, I'd say definitely in my case. Thanks.
Yeah. Can I say something, please?
Let me just check. Joy, are you complete?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, Musa, I would love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you. The way I see it, because historically the masculine was the one who set the rules in the world, and the feminine became in a way subservient to the masculine, and her role, or society created for her a role to serve that masculine model of society. So that's where the feminine was suppressed, and it's not that the world was it was fake, wasn't balanced. So now it's about time that the feminine has to unfold, to flourish, to blossom, and to present herself to the world. And the world is different. The world expected from her a different role. So it's an understand. It needs it requires an understanding from the masculine for the allowance to allow the feminine to express herself, and also an understanding and the part of the feminine for her role. It requires both sides understanding together to create a new world.
I very much agree. Thank you.
So as much as the masculine has to have the understanding, the feminine has to be in understanding of herself and the masculine and her new role.
And I want to press into a little bit what I said about the feminine being easily overpowered. I first started connecting with this myself when I was in the Tantra world. And I started doing very simple, very, very initial basic activities with men. Where, for example, an activity, Tantra, this was energy sharing. It wasn't being in bed, wasn't sexuality. This was very beginning, foundational work of energy sharing and learning how to share energy. And for some of these activities, the instruction would be to sit back to back with a male partner. And I had the experience that I almost always was taking more weight than I was comfortable with. And I don't think the men that I was with had any awareness that it was uncomfortable for me, because they were very comfortable. I don't think they were trying to lean on me or push on me, but I don't think they realized how much bigger their body was than me, and what it would really take for me to be comfortable as a fairly slender woman and not very strong woman. There just wasn't that awareness. And I saw it with partner after partner after partner, that there's a way that physically I was very easily overpowered. And recently, there's been this Me Too movement of women starting to speak about their experiences of being overpowered sexually by men, experiences in their life. And one of the posts that I read said, how many men walk through a dark street and feel by themselves and feel scared that someone might come out and attack them? Not very many. How many women, and every woman in the room will raise her hand if she's honest. Maybe if she's huge or has martial arts background or something, she'll say, no, I feel safe. But I would say 99 to 100% of the women will say, yes, I have the experience of walking down a street. It's dark. I'm alone. I could be attacked. I could be overpowered. And then if you just look at the sexual aspects that the woman receives and the man asserts, it's the woman is much more vulnerable in that and much more easily overpowered. It is much harder for a woman to overpower a man sexually than it is for a man to overpower a woman sexually. And I've heard lots of stories from men saying, oh, no, I've been overpowered. I felt like I was raped. I'm like, yes, you might have had that experience, but we're looking at the pattern, the overview. And the very big reality is women are easily overpowered physically, sexually, and to some extent energetically by the masculine. And I think it's more than just culture. I think it's part of what it is to be feminine, that the feminine fundamentally is receptive and the masculine fundamentally is assertive. And if that is not held in with great consciousness, with great care, it can so easily turn into dominance and overpowering. I know that that may be a very controversial statement I just made, and I'm open to hearing responses.
This is Rajender. I agree with you. And I'm a large woman. I'm tall, I'm strong, but I have also done weight tantric, which is non-sexual, and back to back, and it's always the case. Men lean on me. Yeah. And when you're sitting on the floor cross-legged, your like core muscles are like, oh my God. So yeah.
And I would say they probably have no awareness that they're doing that and would be shocked even if you said that.
Absolutely. They just feel like they're sitting up, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And then the energetic thing, I am married, and I experience this probably regularly. And I do see that I do this. I like block myself from receiving that energy all the time because it's always like too much, too much, too much. So I haven't learned after that'll be 25 years how to balance that. So yeah, it's definitely there.
And I'm really hoping that next week's session will be a contribution to that, that will give some real help.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Anything else anyone wants to share before we dive into the king?
Yeah, I have to say that internally, I've had this war between the masculine and the feminine of myself for many years, because when you go to work, you have to develop your masculine attributes. And when you are at home and being a mother and things like that, you have to be the feminine part. And then unless you have this type of education that we're getting right now, I was at war for 50 years, yeah? And I have to say that it's not easy to find a balance like Musa is proposing, because the feminine part introduces chaos to the masculine order, yeah? And even in myself, that chaos is really hard to manage. So we need to, I think for myself, what I've learned these last 12 months has been first to value the feminine, independent of the masculine. And then once you have the value there, then you make the effort to make it work, and then to somehow have the skills to manage the chaos. And then is when more the balance can come. So I also very sensitive to the fact that in society it's not going to be easy to find this balance, because we have one kind of order that we are challenging, and there's a lot of resistance, not only men, but also many women.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're talking about a new society. We're talking about something, and this is what Mary Magdalene came here, and now she and Yeshua together are working this, from my point of view, to initiate this change, because according to them, they're very clear. This is our gateway to the higher dimensions. This is what we came here to learn at this stage, and we're ready now. We're ready to do it. And yes, she said initially the very first step is the feminine has to get strong, has to find itself, has to reconnect with itself, and has to get strong, because there's been, like Musa was saying, this long history of the feminine being suppressed and losing its strength, losing its awareness of itself and its skills and abilities. So the feminine is first, that's the first step. And that's why she brought in that whole Magdalene Heart Path process. And primarily it's women who are responding to that, in my experience. And that's great. And that's the beginning strength. And then out of that, women are going to become the leaders of attracting men into this. And just like you said, it is the feminine at this point that's going to start educating the masculine. That's Mary Magdalene's very clear guidance, and that it has to happen in a certain way. It has to happen through love, or the masculine wants nothing to do with it. So she's really clear about what this pathway is, and I so agree with what you said, Maria. And when we get to the part where we're talking about initiation, I think that's going to be our salvation, is that I think it's working with the young people who, if we can get strong enough in ourselves as the leaders, and this is where we're being the magician mentors, if we can get strong enough in ourselves that we can mentor young people into a new and different way, and that happens through initiation, that I think that's where the whole change can happen. So that's what gives me hope. Certainly, I want to change myself selfishly for my own growth and well-being and happiness, as well as that's where we always start in contributing to the world, is through our own, change. But beyond that, I move to work with anyone who wants to learn about this and be part of this change. I'm so grateful for all my spiritual companions on this path, and I deeply, deeply hope that it reaches the young people where they can start off learning a different way rather than have to unlearn and relearn like all of us have.
I just wanted to mention one quick thing before we went on. So I have had the experience of somebody who it wasn't like in a physical situation like you were talking about, with a tantra back-to-back kind of thing, but it was a conversation, and that they were so present. It was a male, and it's somebody that was really very connected to nature, and it was really just fascinating and talking to him, because you could just, it was visceral. You could feel that presence. And so it really, when it happens, when somebody is really present and connected that way, it actually is pretty amazing. So it's just, it's kind of nice to have that experience where you can kind of see, oh, okay, this is how it can be. So yeah, anyways, I just wanted to mention that.
I love that. Thank you. And one of the principles is that the feminine always leads to the masculine. And in my experience, when someone holds space for me and is really present for me, I complete and I get reconnected to my heart. And then once I'm there, always my awareness turns to, and how about you? What's going on for you? But until that point, it's not really authentic for me, because there's a feminine that's like, wait in me. But once I'm heard and listened to and connected with, it always turns to the masculine, that I want to include the masculine.
If I could just add one thing, this is the thoughts related to what Maria was saying and Musha was saying, is that not only historically has there been this domination aspect, patriarchal association, but the masculine is inherently not just more of a threat to the feminine, it's also more of a threat to the other masculine. And it's in the natural, strive to dominate over each other. So it's something that even other masculines, they're more concerned about other masculines.
And this is the perfect segue into the king.
Okay.
This is the difference between the king and the warrior. That is one of the key differences, is because the warrior is still in, this oppositional mode, this competition mode.
Yeah.
If the warrior is aligned to a higher source, be it in some form of the king is what it is, that may pull them beyond that. But the pure warrior energy is this competition, this sparring energy. The king energy takes it into, this is for the highest good of all, and this is inclusive of all, and it's like, you know, side by side rather than like this, you know. So thank you for that.
All right, well, I'll pause there then.
All right, so with that, let's go into king. I'm going to call up my slides again here. Okay, so let's see if I can get this. Oh dear. Oh, here's how it works. Okay, so welcome back to the king. King, more than anything else, there's two parts to the king. One is king is integration of the first three. It's integration of the warrior, magician, and lover. So it's, you know, standing on the shoulders of, that beautiful expression, you know, where many have said about it, you know, if I have done something great, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. This is standing on the shoulders of the full development of warrior, magician, and lover. So the king is very much about wholeness. And I want to break this down a little bit. King as warrior. Historically, this was one of the biggest entrees into becoming a king, was to be the general, the leader, the victorious warrior. And you see it throughout history. Here are some of our great figures historically who've been warrior leaders. And this is the other aspect that makes a king. A king is a leader. But the leadership of a king comes out of its integration, of a true king, a higher king, comes out of the integration of all the previous archetypes. But historically, this was the first developed path of kingship, was through being a great warrior, oftentimes a general. And we have so many of these. And in modern history, we have them too. You know, one of our more recent ones in the United States is General Eisenhower, who became President Eisenhower and was, of course, like any leader, you know, had his controversy and, you know, supporters and detractors, but in general was very beloved as a president and did many, you know, things that contributed to the greater society and came out of a warrior background. So, and if we look at it in terms of our 4D archetypes, the warrior is the ability to accomplish things through action. Certainly that's necessary for a leader. That, you know, a leader, the king energy needs to be able to get things done, needs to be able to move into their warrior aspect. So they need that within themselves, and they also need warriors as part of the kingdom that they are leading, who are getting things done, whether it be in a war, but also it can be in a society. That the warriors who are the action people, the movers, the doers in the society is part of what the king is leading. So that's the first. Then if we look at king as magician, here are some of our modern day magician kings. Walt Disney, I think, is a fascinating modern day archetype of someone who had very strong magician energy, very creative, very bringing in new ideas, new imagination. It was all about imagination and Imagineers. And he created a kingdom, literally a magic kingdom that even long after his death goes on and is quite a force in our world. Steve Jobs certainly created a kingdom. I would say he, to me, represents an incomplete king figure because I don't see the wholeness of the development of the lover energy in him. But certainly, you know, he's a modern day king and really brought his magician energy into it. And so looking at, you know, king strong in the magician mode, I would say no list would be complete without mentioning him in our modern world. And this is a big thing in just the business world altogether, you know, and Warren Buffett, I think, is another example of, you know, someone in what you might call the more conventional business world, the finance world, but that's dealing with, you know, all kinds of ideas, non-material things, and, you know, creating a real huge organization, an organization you could call a kingdom. And if you are the leader, if you are the CEO, if you are the one at the, you know, the leadership position, then that's part of your king energy as well. So in our work world, often, well, we'll talk about this later. I'll get to that later. And then we have king as lover. And these are some of our modern day images and examples of the king energy as lover. And one of the things I realized in this, I realized that to my knowledge, I could be off because I'm not a historian, but I'm not aware of any president in the United States who has ever been president without being married. And if there is one or two, they're certainly the great exception. In general, it's a significant part of what the public expects, is that the king will have a queen. And I think it's more than just that we love, of course, there's, you know, it's bringing in the feminine energy, and it's expected that that will be represented, that the king will have embodied that opening to the feminine sufficiently that it will be manifested as having a feminine partner. And if you look at these three figures in particular, you know, I'm certainly aware of how much an element of the power of the king came from the people who they were leading being in love with the feminine who was in the queen energy, being in love with Jackie Kennedy, being in love with Michelle Obama, and now being in love with Kate Middleton. And I think it's more than just, you know, something, you know, off to the side or whatever. It's really a fundamental way that we can only trust a king if they have really incarnated their lover energy. That before that, if they're just coming from the warrior and the magician energy, they're not trustable to take care of us. If their heart isn't open, as, you know, in the lover archetype, they're not trustable to care about us. And so to me, this is something that maybe isn't acknowledged explicitly. I wasn't aware of it before this study of how significant this is, that leaders are, that the gateway to being the leader is having completed all the way through that integration, including the lover. And oftentimes it's a significant part of their leader role. So we've been talking about chakras with each of these archetypes, and the king to me is about the crown chakra, which of course is often associated with purple, very regal color. I wore my purple today for this kingly class. And to me, the crown chakra is very much about integrating. It's about integrating all the other chakras. And it's also about integrating with what's beyond the next dimension and our higher levels that we're moving to. So that totally makes sense that the crown chakra, for me, it makes sense that that's where the king energy is centered. And in doing that, I would say that our crown chakra tends to be one of our more masculine chakras. And if we look at all the chakras, here we have the four archetypes that we're working with the warrior being the third chakra, the lover being the fourth chakra, the heart, warrior being solar plexus, magician being third eye, sixth chakra, and king being crown. And I would say the lover, the heart, is the feminine chakra of these archetypes, but the other three are in predominantly masculine chakras connecting to. Of the other chakras, I would say that the physical body, the root chakra, is primarily feminine, that the sacral chakra is primarily feminine. That's the chakra of emotion, of energy, and the foundation of relationship. and that the heart chakra is primarily feminine. And the throat chakra, I say, is neutral, that it's both it's very balanced, masculine and feminine in terms of expression, that there's a balance of masculine and feminine expression in the throat chakra. So with each of these archetypes, we talk about them representing a certain kind of power, that the warrior was the power of action, that the magician was the power of the mind, that the lover was the power of love, and the king is the power of wholeness. So all of them are representing a certain kind of power, a certain kind of masculine power, and each one unique and having an interplay with the others. So this wholeness brings in that idea of integration. It also brings in the idea of strength, the strength of wholeness. And this is a traditional symbol that I think is, I want to say it's the Kala Chakra Tantra, but I'm not sure. But I'm told, in my research, it represents wholeness in the Indian tradition. And if someone knows better than me and can correct me, feel free to unmute yourself and correct that. So, how does the king manifest? Well, the first place is it manifests within each of us, our inner king. This is the integrating function within ourselves of all the masculine parts of us. So it's our inner integration of our inner warrior, our inner magician, our inner lover, and for our own, becoming our own inner king. And a lot of the men's movements today are very much working with this. One of the popular phrases is reclaim your kingship, reclaim your throne, reclaim your inner throne. Phrases like that, very much working with for men to reclaim their wholeness of their masculinity and taking them through a process of reclaiming the parts that may not have been fully developed or may have been disconnected from. So this is the first way, is for all of us to become our inner king or queen, if we're manifesting more in the feminine, but it's relative to our masculine. And I have certainly seen myself very much go through this process of strengthening this through this last year, where I've gone through this intensive study and learning about the masculine and naturally strengthening different parts of myself. I was saying before this call started that I moved this weekend, and I really felt myself in my inner warrior, because there was a lot of like activating just at the level of action to, get all my stuff moved. There was also definitely the magician energy going on, because I was thinking out how this move was going to work in advance and coordinating all the parts with everyone and holding the picture and checking off in my mental checklist as each part got done. And did we include everything? Did we forget anything? And it all happened beautifully. And a lot of it was because I had called upon my magician energy, my mind energy, to really make all the parts work out. And then, fortunately, I had a friend helping me who was helping keep me in my lover energy. So I wasn't just getting all warrior and magician about this. I was staying connected to my heart and got some hugs and all sorts of things that kept me balanced. And I felt a kind of a real celebration about how I felt I approached this from a place of strength and integration, even in my king at a few points where I had hired some people to help with lifting when we were actually doing the moving part and packing it a certain way, and where I stepped in and said, actually, I'd like this done differently. And I was really proud of myself that I was able to step into my leadership there and say, from a place that felt like more my masculine, because I've done it in the past from a place that felt more like my feminine, where it felt more like criticism and more like hysteria and more like, tension. And I wasn't at all coming from that place. I was coming from a place of relaxed ease and just saying, I prefer it to be done this way. And it worked beautifully. They really responded, said, no problem, okay. And that was a new strength coming forward in me. So, little story about my inner king and a celebration of my growth. The next place the king energy tends to show up is in the family situation. And we have this phrase, head of the family. And you could call that the king, the leader role. And so in terms of sociology and culture, you could say our family is maybe our first level out from ourself. We go from being our inner king and king of all the parts of ourselves to our closest, family connections around us, however that shows up. And of course, I have this old picture that I have enjoyed throughout this course of the TV show from the 60s of Father Knows Best, who was definitely the head of the family. And I think the 60s and the 50s maybe too were a time where there was a more clear awareness and acceptance of this role of the king energy in the family. And I still think that's one of the places where the king can show up, and doesn't have to be a man. It can be a woman in the queen position. We certainly have had many families being led by women, but I think we're leading it often from our masculine, whether we're in the feminine or the masculine gender. We're leading it from our inner masculine when we're in that leadership role. And supported by our inner feminine, hopefully. So hopefully there's a union going on. The next tier out or circle out, you could say, is in our business world where we have leaders. And when I was first interviewing men about my research, I had found out about these archetypes and how they play out. Well, first, one of the things I came across was that I came across a reaction in many men to the idea of king. They were identifying king with despot, or a ruler who was just taking power, at the expense of the ones being ruled. And I certainly think we have many examples of that historically, and that is one of the ways the king energy has played out, and it's what I would consider the lower frequency, and we're calling upon the higher frequency. And once I started to explain the bigger picture of what king energy means to me in this archetypal way, that it's about integration, it's about leadership, then they started to light up and say, oh, yes, I love that energy. And one of the men just totally lit up and talked. This was a man who is now retired, but talked about his years of working in the corporate world as a manager and how deeply rewarding that was for him because of his ability to make his life better for the ones he was managing, and also contribute to the goals of the company. And that he felt like he had had great success in doing that, and it had given huge meaning to his life because of that. And he totally identified with that as being the king archetype, and he hadn't ever thought of it that way before. But when I explained the way that, I'm looking at it in this pure archetypal way, he totally saw it, and it was very joyful for him to see it that way. So this is another way that king energy can show up, being a manager, being the CEO, being a business owner, whatever. When you're in the leadership role of a group, that's king energy. And then, of course, we have our political leaders. So I pictured I brought pictures of two of my current favorites right now. Something different, not in the United States. So we have Macron, who has taken the leadership role in France right now. Trudeau, who has taken the leadership role in Canada. Particularly Trudeau, what I have heard of him is that he is really tuned in to the lover energy and to being very open to the heart, coming from the heart, coming from honoring the feminine. And I attribute a lot of his popularity to this. He certainly his popularity in the United States to this, and amongst women in particular. Of course, it doesn't hurt that I think a lot of women think he's very attractive. But beyond that, I think he represents an opening to the feminine, an inclusion of that in the king energy that many people resonate with. And of course, there are many other examples, but these are just two that I selected. And of course, this is the conventional association with king that most people have if they're not thinking about all these other factors that we're bringing in, is king as political leader, king as leader of a group of people that live somewhere and have a political structure, an agreement of, you know, working together as a group, and then the king is their leader. And then king also can be a spiritual leader. And I would say Pope Francis is a very, very good example of, you know, not only is he head of state in his country at the Vatican, but he's a leader for people all over the world, wherever he goes, who look to him very much as their leader. And that is bringing forth king energy in that domain. And for many of our spiritual leaders, they have the lover archetype very integrated, but it's not necessarily in the form of having a partner. It's love of the people that they serve. And I think you see that in Pope Francis. I certainly see it in Pope Francis very strongly. And even the way that he is open to Mary Magdalene and elevated her to the level of the highest level of saint, and what, I don't remember the particular terms for it, but in the Catholic hierarchy and system, she has been elevated to an equal to the highest level of the other saints, and how he has recognized her. And when he did the foot washing of the refugees from the Middle East, the first Easter, I think, that he was Pope, and included women for the first time, that he washed the feet of women instead of only men. I think in so many ways he has included the feminine. And so to me, he's very much of an example of an integrated king in that way. King energy, king archetype. So I want to go on to talking about the 4D version of king, and then hopefully we'll have some time for discussion after this. So in our world today, in our examples, I think the examples of 4D king energy are often spiritual leaders. I think Dalai Lama is one of our strongest, that I would say is very much king energy, that he is the head of the Buddhist Tibetan tradition that he comes from. But beyond that, I think many people all around the world look to him as a leader of our spiritual world altogether. And it's not a physical world, even because he's not living in Tibet anymore. But it's part of our connectivity, that we have this virtual world in a certain way, our virtual connection. And I think he's very much looked at as a leader in that role, and includes the high development of the warrior energy in terms of discipline, and his, you know, just physical mastery of discipline of the body, and the high magician energy of his spiritual development, and then his lover energy. And his communications to me are so much about the lover energy. Like his religion is kindness, you know, his temple is the body. It's really about, you know, bringing forth that energy of love and honoring the body. The physical temple is very much about the feminine. So I see that very much in him. I'm not sure. I'll come back to this because I think it might be later. Martin Luther King he was married. He did have his queen, who was very much in the supporter role, but very much too coming from a mixture of the warrior and the spiritual energy, you know, really working at the grassroots change society level, but also very much coming from a spiritual place. Gandhi, very much so, you know, and I think all of these could have been models for any of the archetypes, you know, that they show that integration of having them all. And Gandhi became a leader for a worldwide movement of nonviolence, as well as a regional movement in India for nonviolence and liberation of, you know, from the rule of the English and the rights of the Indian people. And then Mandela, same thing in many ways. And you'll see a thread in here about nonviolence. And I think that's part of the higher 4D energy, that the higher king has transmuted that warrior energy into nonviolence. The power still of pursuing the right. What is the right? Either the magician energy brings in, you know, what is the highest, what is the right here, but through nonviolent rather than through things that are create suffering, create loss and pain and hurt. And even to the degree that I remember, I believe seeing an interview with Dalai Lama, and somebody was proposing a certain action to take relative to empowerment for the Tibetan people who had been displaced. And the Dalai Lama's response was, I'm not sure that that would be honoring the Chinese. That to me is true king energy. He was not only holding the whole of all the people that he was representing, he was holding the whole of humanity. And that's really, to me, very strong 4D wholeness energy. And then we have the model of Jesus, Yeshua, who is often referred to as a king. And I want to really separate this out from the Christian concept of Jesus as king, because a lot of people have backgrounds and reactions to that because of the way it was presented. And I'm not talking about the Christian orientation of Jesus is the king. I am talking about the higher 4D based on this archetypal energy that we're looking at. So what I want to do here is I want to review relative to Jesus, each of these codes that we've talked about relative to each of the archetypes, and see, and I'm going to do this very quickly and briefly, but it will be in the notes. So you can look at this and you'll have access to this again if you want to consider it more deeply at how this Jesus as higher 4D king, how he represents the codes that we're talking about of these new archetypes. So first, the warrior code. And this was know and live your purpose. Serve a higher power. And as I read through these, think of how Jesus embodied this for you or not. Leaving the world a better place. Give your all, do your best. Employ self-discipline to grow your mastery. Be dependable and trustworthy. Master your emotions. Protect those who are weaker. Respect and honor the feminine. Stand by your teammates, companion warriors. So here, what I'm sensing from this is we went over this exact list with the warrior, how this is the higher 4D warrior. But if you think of it now in terms of that being integrated into the king, I think you see how this totally just folds right in to what we look to for a higher king. Before I go on, I just want to see, does anyone have any comments about this, about the warrior aspect of the king and the higher warrior aspect of the higher king? Okay, then let's go on to the code of the new, the code of the new magician. And this again is the exact code we talked about the week we looked at magician. But think of this now in terms of king, and does this fit for Jesus? Awakening higher consciousness, taking 100% responsibility, raising your frequency, using speech to bring light, respecting others, which does not mean never challenging others, but you do it in a respectful way, not a damaging way. Be aware of your beliefs. Consciously create the highest reality. So for me, this very much corresponds to the way I relate to Yeshua and to the 4D aspect of the king. That this is the way the magician feeds into the higher king of bringing in all of these qualities. And then we have the code of the lover, and this is what I didn't present last week. So you haven't seen this before, but this is all the principles that we were going over. And so to consider this as part of king energy, and also whether in your consideration this applies to Jesus. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and body. So the king is also serving a higher king. The 4D king is still serving a higher king, which is the divine. Love your neighbor as yourself. And this is critical for the king energy, because just as Chris was pointing out to that transition from fighting your neighbor out of competition to loving your neighbor, big piece for the king. Open to the feminine in yourself, others, and the earth. Surrender to, serve, and champion the feminine. And this to me is based on that inherent understanding of the feminine is dependent on the masculine. And so the real king energy, the strong king, includes that and benefits from the feminine strength as a result. Allow and express feelings, emotions, and physical sensations, which is what I mean by feelings. What Mary Magdalene talks about as feelings. So the true king is able to be emotional. They have included their lover to that point. I've seen this in demonstrations of the Dalai Lama, for example. You know, definitely able to express emotion. Trust the veracity of feelings, and this is lover energy again, where you're trusting that when someone is expressing feelings, you're not going to talk them out of it and say, no, that's not right. You're trusting that's real, whether it's my feelings or someone else's feelings, those feelings are real. Giving love and receiving the joy of that giving, certainly king energy as a part of incorporating the lover. And let the feminine's love of you bring out your strengths and best qualities. And here's where we talked about, this is kind of like behind every great man is a great woman. Very much a king statement is being fed by the feminine's love to do your highest work, to be your best. So, yes? Somebody want to say something?
Yeah, this is Chris, and I just had a thought, although I thought I heard somebody else's voice for a moment, which is in the lover aspect. I found it really valuable that you were pointing out it's not just about expression and sharing with others, it's also about being open to receive. And I saw that there's the joy of receiving on that list, but I didn't see that there's the being open to receive. So
Are you saying that's something that needs to be added?
Yes.
Ah, let me go back to the list and take a look. If you give me a second. Okay, so give love and receive the, where was, okay. Tell me again, because now that I'm looking at it, I need to hear you say it again.
Being open to receive from others. I think that's something that discussed about being the lover is that it's a two-way relationship.
Oops.
So.
Oops.
I see it in number 3. Open to the feminine in yourself and others.
But I'm hearing even open to the masculine, just being open to others. And that certainly is a king energy, that a king will, their great strength, one of their strengths is that they draw on the strengths of everyone else, and they have to be open to do that. And so I think, well, that's a king energy more than a lover energy.
Is it? Okay.
Aha. So let's go to the next one. So the next one is the code of the king. And let's see if it shows up there. And if it doesn't, let's add it. The next one is the new king code. So the integration of all of these. Serve and support the well-being of all, number 1. And this is that transition from the warrior competition to the king inclusion of all. Base decisions on the greatest good. Certainly that's suggested in that you have to be open to others to even know what the greatest good is, but it's indirect, it's not direct. Respect the free will of all individuals. Hold clear vision and values aligned to spirit. So here's where the king energy still has the higher king, spirit. Endeavor to do no harm. And that's where the nonviolent transition of the 4D, power begins to come in. Support others' strengths, acknowledge others' contributions. And here I think would be the place to add, include others, like receive others receive input from others. Tell me how you would say it, Chris.
I'm not sure that's, I think that the king code is definitely inclusive of the others, but it might be a little bit more on the lover code. It's just that being open to receive, which is also naturally a part of being, vulnerable and bringing down your walls.
I think you're right. I think you're right. I think I agree with you. Okay, I'm going to work on this. So when I send out the notes, I will include that. I will add that in. I'm making myself a little note here, and really appreciate you bringing that out, because I think that's a really important part, and really appreciating your masculine awareness in that.
You're welcome. It's because I noticed that is a weakness of my own.
Oh.
So, having that internal, sensitivity to that particular aspect, I just noticed that it might not have been represented yet.
Great, thank you.
I appreciate him too. This is Rajendra, because it kind of shed some of what I was struggling trying to express earlier. So thank you.
Wonderful. And please give me feedback if you still don't feel it's sufficiently included when when I rework this. I want to keep working on it till we get it.
No problem.
All right, thanks. Okay, so the last few of this new king code is speaking honestly and respectfully, which often means saying things that are challenging, where you're really saying what the king says, what their truth is, what they really see, and doesn't hold back. That's part of their being a leader. And inspiring others through your demonstration. So part of the king energy is you're not just being the leader for everyone else. You're first and foremost demonstrating it in your own being and life. So I see these as describing Yeshua too, in his kingly aspect, not the way necessarily the Christian church refers to Jesus the King, but the way I relate to Yeshua, the higher king archetype and the model for us in this. So,
I have a question.
yes.
I also see the king energy as, in addition to hold the clear vision and values aligning to spirit, is that they have clear their power as creators.
I am going to add that. Clear in their power to create. Power to create, I would say, for a group, you know, not just creation like the magician for an individual, for themselves.
Yeah, I would say for the greatest good. Because I think the king, you know, I don't know, that's an image that I have.
Mm-hmm. Good. I like that. I will add that one in too. Thank you. So, would somebody tell me the time, because I can't see my clock on my computer right now. I want to do a time check.
11:28. Oh, 11:29.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we are almost at the end of our time. So I'm going to go forward and go into our practices for this week. Similar first step, if you choose to make a list of your strengths and weaknesses in the king archetype. And this might be relative to your inner king, or it might be relative to your activating that archetype in your life in an outward way. Second, how do you feel about your inner kingship? So this is more of a feeling response. Are you at peace with being king of yourself? Are there any changes you would like to make relative to your inner kingship? And then the third is looking outward. How do you serve as a leader king in the outer world? Are you at peace with this? Are there any changes you would like to make? So very much about self-reflection. And then we have just 2 YouTube videos. I found less about the king this time than I have about the other archetypes, which is interesting because maybe that indicates something that we're growing into and maybe not so clearly manifested yet. But these were 2 very good videos that I found, both of which, like I said, with all of these materials, they don't necessarily completely represent my point of view, but I think they are talking about this arena and have good points to make, and you can consider what you agree with, or if your truth is slightly different. I think it will still enrich your consideration relative to king energy, king archetype. And then some juicy movies. Again, some of my favorite movies. This has been so fun to watch all the movies for me anyway, all along the way here. And if you don't get to them all now, you might go back later and enjoy some of these. I, in particular, want to put forth Wizard of Oz because that represents a woman coming into her kingship, a young woman, you might even say initiation. And I believe she's working with her inner masculine in the terms of, you know, these archetypal scarecrow, tin man, lion, and those are the warrior, the lover, and the magician. And she is coming into her inner integration and leadership of all these parts of herself is one way that you could look at that story in that movie. So lots of juicy things. And of course, like all of the other movies too, you'll see other archetypes in here. These aren't purely king. You'll see other parts, but you will also see king in these, I believe. At least I did. So I pass these on to you as recommended. And then I just want to close here. Give me just a moment with what's coming up, a little preview of what's coming up next for us. And that is next week we'll be doing integrating the feminine and masculine. Next week is our last meeting. However, we never got to the initiation material. And I think that's super important. We may get to it next week, but I'm kind of guessing we won't because I don't want to be racing through this material and I want to give real enough time and space to it that we really cover it and with some depth for all of us. So what I am thinking is the following Saturday, we don't have anything scheduled because that's the Saturday after Thanksgiving in the US. And for many people, it's a busy time. So what I am thinking is of offering a bonus session for this course on that Saturday, which is 2 weeks from today. And if somebody can quickly do the math, you can come up with the date. I'm not going to do it right now. You have to unmute yourself. So that's what I'm thinking is probably going to happen, is in 2 weeks, I'm going to offer a bonus session. If you're available and can make it, it will be at the same time that these other ones have been. And if not, it will be recorded and you can watch the recording. And we'll cover both traditional initiation and then possibilities for what 4D initiation might look like of our new 4D masculine. And I'm very excited about this. And then the week after that, which is December 2nd, Saturday, December 2nd, will be our last meeting together. And that is where I will be channeling Yeshua and inviting him to speak about everything that we've been covering and what he has to share with us about the 4D masculine. I also invite all of you to ask questions. And what I would like is that you submit those questions to me in advance that you would like to have asked of Yeshua. So I'm mentioning it now so that you can start thinking about what questions relative to the sacred masculine you might like to hear Yeshua speak about. And then we'll see how many come in, and out of those, how many we'll be able to get to. But I would like to have those submitted in advance. And finally, I'm also starting, in a week, I will be starting to offer the private coaching sessions for people who are in this class, where we'll be looking at any questions you have about the sacred masculine and coaching for how you might work with this material, integrating it in your life, strengthening your sacred masculine, or integrating with your feminine in your life. So if you have not yet made your appointment for your private session, please send me an email and we'll schedule that. So that's all my announcements for today, and we're getting closer to ending on time. Any last comments anyone wants to make about this material today? Questions, comments? Yes.
You were asking about what is the date for that following. That's the 25th.
Okay, great. So Saturday, November 25th will be most likely, I'll confirm next week, but most likely that's going to be a bonus class we're going to be adding in, which I hope as many people as possible can make it.
And will you be also recording the channeling?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Any other questions, comments about the king? Anything from this before we close? Okay, then. I invite everybody to unmute yourself. We'll share a goodbye, and I look forward to connecting with you next week.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.